The problem with not recognizing and reflecting is you do become too reliant on other people's shout outs, praise, recognition. And it can
Mm.
become like a bit of a drug where you're constantly needing it. When you get it, it feels nice in the moment, but it dissipates very quickly. And you're back to doubting yourself, going, did they just say that? Did they really mean it? Feeling like almost every day is like a
Mm.
knockout game and you're having to prove yourself it's a win or a loss. I think anxiety, like every emotion, is a signal, not a threat. And a lot of the time we see it as, this thing that's fighting against us, when often if we can change the way we respond to it versus react to it, we can kind of go, oh, what's this trying to tell me versus why is this happening to me? Deloitte released a study 2 or 3 years ago now where they labeled about 25 core emotions that we feel, but there's 34,000 combinations that we actually can
Wow.
experience.
Hey, cosmic people and listeners, welcome back to the show. Chris Hatfield is going to be our guest today. And I would say he is the leading expert, at least that I know, when it comes specifically to mindset, mental health, well-being for the sales community. So if you're in sales, I imagine some points you get stressed, you feel fear, you feel anxiety. And Chris is going to be giving some really good actionable takeaways that you can use in your day-to-day. A little bit about Chris. So he runs his own company called Sales Psyche, very similar to mine in that he's training and coaching salespeople, but he is specifically focused on the mindset and well-being of them. He describes himself as a sales mindset and well-being coach. Even if you're not in sales, he actually runs another company called My Psyche, which is more for people in general. And there he describes himself as an attachment style coach. So he thinks a lot of our problems that we have are related to attachment. So we'll be running through those today. And yes, let's get into the show with Chris. Right, Chris, thanks a lot for coming on today. I'm excited about the show, as obviously we share a lot in common with the kind of, sales background and also the interest in mental health. So really looking forward to today.
Yeah, thanks for having on, Michael. I'm really excited for this.
All right, well, let's get into it. So I find often the line of work that we go into is often based on our own personal stories, and you've obviously passionate about mental health, not just for salespeople, but I think in general as well. So, like, what's been
Mhm.
your own personal journey when it comes to mental health?
Yeah, so it kind of all started really when I came out of university, 15, 16 years ago, and recognized very early on that I struggled a lot with anxiety. It sort of probably was around before then, but didn't quite understand enough about it to associate it. So that was when I first became aware, and sort of stemmed back from childhood, and really wanted to understand, because at the time it sort of came out in my first ever sales job, which was door-to-door sales, 100% commission only, go and knock doors, that kind of thing. And thought, I don't just want this to kind of limit me and stop me from doing this, because what are some other things it might stop me from doing? So I went on a bit of a personal journey of wanting to better understand myself, having gone to uni and done sports coaching, and had an interest around that. And sort of recognized that, first of all, there wasn't really anything around it, particularly back then. And secondly, this kind of topic was something that was quite reactive. I sort of noticed going through my sales career
Mm,
that we weren't really talking about it, or people weren't talking about it until they were burnt out, not motivated, or were leaving or had left, and then discussing these things. And it kind of just made me more aware. And as I went through my own personal journey of learning more about it, started sharing this with other people and recognizing, oh, this is something that's valuable and can be useful, that isn't just focused on the kind of process and skill
yeah,
set side of things.
yeah, definitely. So you mentioned the door-to-door sales, which is probably one of the hardest sales jobs you can possibly do in terms of getting rejected a lot, having to be resilient. I think a lot of people who would feel anxiety in those situations maybe would then shy away from something like
Mhm.
sales. So why did you decide to like stick at sales despite having gone through that?
I suppose it was, kind of a little lesson for me of thinking, well, if I shy away from this, am I going to, of course, that's not saying that sales is for everyone. And sometimes people go into it and recognize that it's not for them. So I'm not speaking exclusively here, but just more from my own perspective was, what else will my anxiety stop me from doing if it stops me from doing this?
Yeah.
And I just wanted to sort of go, you know what, I don't have to make a finite decision. I can still stop at some point, but, and I think that's the other thing, some people can get into a finite mindset with these things and think, I have to make a decision right
Hmm.
now. But it was kind of like, well, let me go and learn about this now that I know what it is, maybe how I can build a healthier relationship with it, which I see
Hmm.
anxiety as something that benefits me now. And then I'll see where I'm at, really. So that was my kind of headspace for that decision.
Yeah, so you mentioned anxiety as something that benefits you there. Um,
Hmm.
I've I've a bit of a problem, I think, often the way like mental health and psychology and this stuff is portrayed online, because sometimes it's like, oh, avoid toxic people, avoid toxic things, but at the end of the day in society and life, we're always going to face things that are going to give us things like anxiety. And I think sometimes I don't
Yeah.
agree with a lot of the advice we get online. So it seems in your case, two things I really like you said. One was, as you said to start, oh, just because sales is making me anxious, it doesn't necessarily mean sales is a bad profession for me. And then two,
Mm.
you just said there, like anxiety, you actually see it as a positive. So could you like explain those two things in a little bit more detail for us?
Yeah, I think anxiety, like every emotion, is a signal, not a threat. And a lot of the time we see it as, this thing that's fighting against us, when
Mm.
often if we can change the way we respond to it versus react to it, we can kind of go, oh, what's this trying to tell me versus why is this happening to me? The same with stress as well, which is of course commonplace in sales. But as soon as I started changing that and kind of going that I'm anxious for a reason, I can't always stop myself from feeling anxious, but I can change the way I respond to it, and maybe looking at what is this? What am I anxious about? Because too often I think people just go, I'm anxious about this call, I'm anxious about this demo, I'm stressed about my target. And it just stays there in the feeling. And it's kind of going, what is it behind here that's causing you that? Is it that someone's going to ask you a question you don't know the answer to, throw out an objection, you think, oh God, I don't know what I'm going to say to this, or I don't know how I'm going to be comfortable with someone in that room because I've never met them before, for example. And it's kind of going, okay, well, what's within my control to do that, to manage that? So it might be preempting that objection, preparing for that question, researching that person before you step in that room, or reaching out to your contact and asking what they want to see. And what most people do is they might do these things. Some people don't at all. Some people just stress and get anxious and then feel massive relief that none of it happened. But even when people do these things, they don't reflect on it afterwards. They just think, oh, thank God nothing went wrong. And it's going, well, hang on, if you weren't anxious, you might not have prepped in that way. You might not have preempted that thing. You might not have gone over those slides. You might have not made you more proactive at the start of your quarter because you were anxious about hitting your target. So it's not trying to be toxic positivity here and go, oh, these feelings are all great, like they should always be really nice. But it is going, if you change the relationship of maybe what they're trying to tell you, it makes it an easier experience. And the really simplistic answer I often give to this is like when you're thirsty. Thirst isn't necessarily like it's not a challenging sort of feeling. But if we didn't know how to, deal with it, it could be something that you get a headache from and you become more and more worried about. But when we're thirsty, we don't go, oh God, what would happen if I didn't drink for 2 or 3 weeks? We get some water. And it's a very clear sort of, there's the signal, hey, get some water, and we do. So it's kind of like, it's not as simplistic, but when I started to feel anxious, it was more going, okay, well, what is this trying to tell me? Like, what am I anxious about and what's within my control in this situation?
Yeah, I really like that. And I was reading some of your content before the podcast, and I saw something around like, you being a battery as well. And like
Mm-hmm.
if you're at 20%, or if your phone is at 20%, you're obviously going to go and charge your phone. But sometimes we don't charge ourselves in those situations. And actually reminded me of something, because one of my colleagues who does, training, sales training for lots of people, he's got one of those Whoop things. And he said
Mm-hmm.
it was like really revealing, because he realized like his heart rate before like a big sales training call was like going up to what it would be when he was doing like very intense exercise, which was crazy.
Mm.
But his takeaway was that, and this is advice I'd given him before, was he needs to like space out more time, like before he would have a couple of those back to back, which is kind of crazy because you've just got off one thing that is maybe anxiety in a good way. You're trying to be prepared, but then you're getting onto that next call straight away. And I think that was the point of your post, right? That is like you need to leave time in your day to actually like, recharge your battery.
Yeah, well, it's also like being proactive with it. It's a very reactive thing, like waiting until you need a break, waiting until that email comes in and stresses you out at 3 p.m. or you start to lose it, or until the end of your day and week. And by then you're in battery saving mode anyway. You're not really being efficient.
Yeah.
You probably haven't been focused, and you might think it's that email at 3 p.m. or that conversation from someone or that Slack message that's caused you to like ruin your day, but it's probably been sat at your desk for 4 or 5 hours, haven't got any water, haven't got fresh air, haven't done anything. And if you use your phone for 4 or 5 hours, it's not going to be, it's going to get hot, it is going to get temperamental, it's going to slow down. So it's more around like thinking how you can proactively recharge. And also when things do happen, how you can reactively recharge and not just think that's it. This has thrown me off my day. This has ruined my day. That one call, that one situation, that one deal that's been postponed. Because again, that can become a limiting belief where it's like every time I get this, I then have to wait until the next day or week before I can start again.
Yes, 100%. So what are some tactics then, with this metaphor of like recharging your battery? How can you do that in your day to day? Like what are some actionable things you could do?
Yeah, so I think first of all, the proactive ones and proactive and reactive, like kind of like recharge stations are thinking they can be the same thing, but with a different intention. So your proactive ones would be blocking them in as if it was like you block in your prospecting every day or your research or certain things you have throughout your day, but going right, no matter what, at this time at 10:30 every morning, I'm going to go for a walk for 5 minutes, for example, or I'm going to just get up from my desk, have a stretch, go and get some water, or I'm going to listen to this type of music to get me into a good headspace or to kind of recharge myself because I'll know maybe I'll have done like an hour or so of like prospecting and other bits by then. And I'll have maybe one in the morning. I'll make sure I take lunch. And when I'm taking lunch, I'm doing it. I'm not going because people could talk about here like, oh, the zone, isn't it good to get in the zone? And it is, but the danger of the zone is you sort of get too immersed in it and you sort of lose focus on how you're feeling. It's a bit like going for a run or going to the gym.
Yeah.
It feels good in the moment and you know it feels good, but you know if you try to do that workout all over again or keep going, you would cramp up or your body would fail on you at some point. So
Yeah.
it's having that mindset with work as well. So the proactive ones are there. And then your reactive ones are here's like 3 to 5 things, almost like in case of emergency break here glass. Here's my list. And when something happens, before I make a judgment before I call time on my quarter or things. I'm not going to do anything until I've done at least one of these things. I'm going to make myself a promise that I've got to do one of these things and then I'll decide how I respond to it because often I'll be in a more rational headspace. And one of them being this links to something called the 90-second window is something known as the five senses exercise. So I can go through it with you now if you like. It takes a minute or so and
Yes,
people listening
sure.
along
Yeah,
if
let's
you
do it.
if you want to do this, just make sure you're not driving or anything first of all, because there is a part where you have to close your eyes, and I feel like I have to say that these days with all the red tape around. So,
Yeah.
yeah, if you're listening along, sit comfortably. You don't have to write anything down. You don't have to say anything out loud, and that goes the same for you, Michael. So, what I'd like to do first of all is to just take a couple of deep breaths. And now I'd like you to look around the room you're in and just notice 5 things that you don't always pay attention to. Just mentally note them and just give me a nod when you've got them.
Okay. Yeah, I've got them.
Okay. Now close your eyes. And if you're listening along, close your eyes, feel comfortable and it's safe to do so. And now I would like you to notice 4 things that you can feel on your body. So it could be the clothes, what's in your hands, on your feet, on your head, but 4 things you can feel. Mentally clock them and just give me a nod when you're done.
Okay. Yeah, I've got 4.
Now, 3 things you can hear. If you're listening along as well, might want to take an earphone out for this bit,
Yeah,
but
I
three
was just thinking
things,
that. Okay.
3 things that you can hear, 3 distinct sounds, and you can include my voice as one of them if you want.
Cool. All right. Yeah.
Now, 2 things that you can smell. Keeping your eyes closed if you can.
Okay. Okay. Yeah.
And then finally, 1 thing that you can taste.
All right. Yeah, got that.
Okay, open your eyes. How do you feel?
I feel relaxed. Yeah.
Yeah?
Yeah.
How would you describe your mind right now?
Yeah, calm. It's not the usual, a million things, like
Yeah.
you run a business, there's normally like, I need to do this, I need to do that. Even
Mm.
if you do a podcast, right? And I'm sure you've done podcasts as well. It's kind of that thing of listening and being present with you and asking follow-up questions, but also trying to have a structure. So that's often in your mind while you're doing a podcast. And I feel like that anxiety is just gone. I'm just really like,
Yeah.
I feel like more in the flow state at the moment.
Yeah. So that the five senses exercise is a really good tool to use proactively or reactively. So again, every tool, I think the more you can use something proactively, the less you'll need it reactively. And the more likely you use something when you don't need it, the more likely you are to use it when you do need it, because you're building that
Yeah.
habit as well. But it's a great way. And it's not something to do just once and go, oh, why am I feeling stressed again? Just like drinking water, it's something to do throughout the day to kind of reset yourself in these moments, or proactively kind of recharge and just sort of go again.
Yes, 100%. And that's I really like that point, because one of the reasons I started this podcast is I feel like a lot of what I would call spiritual exercises, which in your case really around mental health, psyche, is we do them as a one-off. So say like meditation
Mm.
is like, we'll do meditation in the morning, we feel great. And then we get to our desk and a million things happen. We start feeling stressed and
Yeah.
it's like, we don't even remember meditating. Whereas you kind of, as you said, you want these things that you can do throughout your day, because it's actually not 7 in the morning when you need to not
Mm.
feel stressed. It's maybe like 11 a.m. when you're getting on with a colleague who maybe you've had an argument with before or something. So I
Yeah.
think it's a really great point.
Yeah, absolutely.
Um, awesome. So I know one of the other things you want to talk about is limiting beliefs. So with yeah, I think I've seen this a lot with salespeople, both that I've trained. I think we're all guilty of it, myself sometimes as well. And you also talk about imposter syndrome as well. And I think like these two things are interrelated. But what do you see? I guess both from a personal journey, like have you had your own limiting beliefs, and then secondly, with some of the people that you're training and coaching?
Yeah, I mean, I think limiting beliefs, there can be some really evident ones, and it's really interesting. I think this is probably the most popular, and popular is a weird word, but the most common topic that comes up when I coach and work with people. Sometimes people are very aware of it. Other times it might be underneath the surface. That's kind of not really is the kind of the root of the cause of the challenge here. But limiting beliefs, just to avoid any assumptions or confusion, is that kind of the statements you might give yourself, like I can't do this, I'm not good with this, this will never work. I'm not there, I'm not good with money, I'm not good with cold calling, I'm not good with
Mm,
presenting, I'll never be as good as this person. This won't work because of this. And sometimes people might ask you why do you feel like that, why is it you're that way, and you might go, I don't know, it just is. There isn't really any evidence around it
mm,
from there. And it's our brains, the analogy I always use is they're a bit like Google. Like anything you type in, it will come back with evidence. So if you're saying I'm not good with cold calling, it's going to go and look for all the calls that went terribly wrong for cold calling. Or sometimes you might have limiting beliefs on something you've never done, but you've seen other people do. You've seen other people deal with situations like that. So you think, oh, I'm not going to be good with that because they weren't. But it
yeah.
will go and look for all the reasons linked to confirmation bias to go, yeah, here's the reasons. It will forget all the times that calls went well, or the same, I can never hit my target if I'm halfway through the quarter and I'm behind. It will look for all the times where you haven't and ignore all the things where you have.
Yeah.
So these limiting beliefs, once you start telling yourself these things over and over, your brain goes, well, if we're not going to do it, then what's the point of putting in energy and time into it? If it's more or less just going dead end, no entry, you can't go down there. When you're driving, you don't even try because you're like, okay, well, I can't. So what's the point of sort of investigating this further? So there can be a real stumbling block for people. And often, we talk a lot about in sales of dealing with prospects' objections, but our own internal objections are probably the biggest things
Mm.
that we often go unanswered a lot of the time.
Yeah, what you're talking about, that I'd call like a self-critic, which is it's interesting because I think I definitely have a big self-critic, and I think sometimes it's useful, or actually quite a
Mhm.
lot of the time it's useful because I am constantly trying to get better, constantly trying to improve, constantly trying to get feedback, do different, coaching, personal development sessions. But also it can be bad if you're like beating yourself up too much and being like, oh, I didn't get this, I didn't get that, I'm letting my team down, I'm letting clients down, whatever it is, right? Or even on a personal level, I'm letting family member down. So what's that balance? Like, how can you have the balance between those two things?
Yeah, as to your point, and similar to what I said about anxiety earlier on, the aim here isn't to stop it from coming up because A, that's not realistic, and B, it does have a lot of value because it can point to areas of development. It can point to things that you want to work on. And that's the thing as well, is being conscious of your self-talk, avoiding the should have need. I need to get better at this. I have to exercise. I should be better at cold calling. I should know more about the product by now. That's, imagine someone else saying that to you. It's not going to help you in that situation. It's only going to cause more like judgment. And often that's why people delay it, because they feel that self-judgment, and sometimes self-sabotage can come from this as well. So it's more like, I want to work on these things. And when I have these things pop up, it's kind of using them as a signal, as a similar to the stress, the anxiety of going, right, okay, what can I do here? So it's one thing here is reframing these beliefs from statements into questions. So rather than I'm not good with cold calling, is how can I become more comfortable with cold calling? Or I don't feel comfortable, I'm not good with presenting to large groups. What is it that I feel difficult at the moment? And what's one thing I can work on within my control to do that? So as soon as you change it from a statement to a question, similar to the Google example, you ask Google a question, it will come back with a lot of possibilities rather than just a statement that it will just come back with the earth is flat, the earth is flat kind of thing. So, change it to a question and you activate your rational brain and disrupt the primal part of the brain, which is where all that kind of emotion and almost feels like it's protecting you, when of course it's only limiting you.
Yeah, I absolutely love that, because it's funny that I would give a salesperson that advice, or I would do that myself on a sales call of, ask a great open-ended question, which is getting the client to think about a problem or your solution, right? But then it's actually using that tactic on yourself for like your own mindset as well. So I think that's really great advice.
Yeah, I mean, similar to that, some people, some of the most ineffective questions are why questions for yourself, unless they're like goal orientated and you're wanting to have a deeper understanding of why do I want to achieve this? But, why did I do this? Why isn't this working? It's, so it's like when someone asks you, like, why isn't this deal closed yet? Or why, like why have you made so many calls and no one's picked up? It's kind of like I can't always answer that. And, why questions, again, are very judgmental. And sometimes even the other kinds of questions, it's not just asking questions here, it's asking constructive questions, because it might be something like, why am I feeling like this? Or am I doing something wrong? Like if someone asks you, are you doing something wrong? Is that really a helpful question? No, I don't think so. Yes. Okay. That doesn't really, it's, to your point, we're so mindful of asking great questions to prospects, to customers, to colleagues, but it's about perfecting that within ourselves as well.
Yeah. So I think we've talked a lot about, I guess, on an individual level, if you are a salesperson, and I think we always need to take accountability for our own actions. But of course, a lot comes from the top, especially in business, right? And I think a lot of managers, not just sales managers, because I know you're doing work like outside of salespeople as well, but I think managers and leaders in general actually creating like a negative environment a lot of the time for their staff. So with, a lot of I know you've worked with some big enterprise companies. What are some of the mistakes that you see managers make in terms of like fostering a culture that doesn't really have a healthy like mental environment?
I think first of all, it's being quite reactive. Sometimes I'll get questions of, oh, I've had this person on my team and I think they're struggling. Like, how do I approach this? I'm not a therapist, what do I do? And it's kind of like, well, there's a few things there. It's not saying you can't deal with this situation, but similar to the energy piece, like the more proactive you are with this, the less reactive you'll need to be, because it shouldn't be that you should only care about this kind of thing when someone is showing maybe that they're not themselves, or it's often because, oh, this person has not stopped performing. So all this person learns is, oh, you only care about me when my performance drops. You don't care about me when it's going well. So therefore, do you really care about me as a person, or do you just care about my number? Consciously or subconsciously, someone will make that link. So it's thinking how you proactively address these elephants in the room. It's thinking about, even from onboarding, when you're talking about vision, when you're talking about here's where we're going, here's what you can earn, is, by the way, here's how you might feel after a month or two. Here's how you'll feel after your first few cold calls. Here's how you'll feel when you miss target for the first time. It's okay. I'm not saying this because I think I want you to, or you definitely will. I'm just saying I'm realistic. And when you do, I'm here to talk. I'm here to talk to you about this. I'm here to support you. And here's how to manage that. So those kind of conversations as well. It's also like proactively checking in on your one-to-ones. I know some great leaders who will have just dedicated one-to-ones around the person. They won't talk numbers. They won't talk any of those kind of things. They'll go, how are you? Like, not just how are you? Because again, it's the coming back to questions. Sales leaders, great at encouraging their team to ask better questions, sometimes terrible at asking questions themselves. And it's thinking, how can I better understand in the same way I'd want my team to understand my prospects? How can I better understand my team? How are you is for example, I'll pick one question. I've probably got 10 examples. It's something we just think people are asking by sort of pleasantries. You might even get that situation where you ask each other 3 or 4 times, how are you? Because it's such a robotic thing. And it's kind of, it's going for a bit of a pattern interrupt here to show someone, even asking it twice can help, or like on a scale of 1 to 10, Ollie Sharp's a great example of this. Ask people like, on a scale of 1 to 10, how are you feeling? And someone might say, oh, I'm a 6 or a 7. Oh, what makes it a 6 or a 7? And someone might then go, oh, I'm a 3 or a 4 one week. Oh, okay. What makes it a 3 or a 4? And then go, if you're asking this question consistently, you might be like, someone was an 8 and now they're a 6. Hang on, this is something to pay attention to. And you might ask that person, oh, you said you were an 8 a few weeks ago. Now you're a 6. What do you think's changed? And it's also helping them reflect. It's not just helping you understand, it's helping them understand. But it's easier to ask that kind of question because sometimes asking how are you feeling is a very confusing thing. So you might ask someone, what are you feeling, or on a scale, to open it up. Because Deloitte released a study 2 or 3 years ago now where we've sort of labeled about 25 core emotions that we feel, but there's 34,000 combinations that we actually can experience.
Wow.
So there's a lot of emotions there that can kind of get mislabeled or misunderstood, or we assume the opposite of. So sometimes asking these kind of questions not only feels like very sort of flippant, but also won't really help someone in this situation. So I think to summarize that point is being proactive with the conversation, like how you support people, how you educating people, how you encouraging to take care of this. And also in those situations, asking better questions and also practicing what you preach. I think leaders sometimes have a distorted view, or not just leaders, people, of that as if you've got accountability and vulnerability on opposing scales, and the more vulnerable you are, the less accountable you make someone. But that doesn't have to be the case. You can be vulnerable and tell people about your story, as long as maybe you follow up with, here's what I did, here's how I worked on it.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be I struggled with this. The end is I struggled with this, and this is what I did, because it's going, hey, look, I've been where you are, but here's a path forward with it.
100%. Yeah. I was literally going to say the same thing and was going to ask you about vulnerability, because a big mistake that I see with managers is they want their team to be vulnerable with them, but they don't want to be vulnerable themselves. And even things like I always say, I don't like to be one of those sales trainers that hasn't made a cold call in years and just relies on inbound. So I still dabble in cold calling to see, how things are changing, if I can still keep my foot in the game. But actually, because I don't cold call as much as I used to, I get probably more scared than I used to when I first start cold calling, because I haven't done it in a while. But having conversations, if I'm training something with my team, look, I get scared, I get anxious before I make a cold call, but I just do it anyway, right? That's my thing. I just and I see what happens, and I try and detach from the outcome and the things that all the gurus will say. But yeah, I think there needs to be that vulnerability where you do say, look, I'm just like you, I'm a flawed human. But then I think what's important is what you said, that there's a solution at the end, because I think sometimes, again, that becomes an issue where it's more like you still want to provide some type of guidance and be like, oh yeah, this sucks and there's no solution to it. You don't want it to be like that either. So.
Yeah, definitely. It's just giving people that understanding, because otherwise, if you don't, you can say open door, come and talk to me. But if you've never shown them that you experienced that topic, people will feel like, am I the odd one out? Like, are you going to judge me for feeling like this? No one else talks about this. So am I doing something wrong?
Yes. Yeah. 100%. Sorry, I got a bit of a cough here.
No worries.
I wanted to ask, so obviously someone that's, very active in like marketing, social media, I'm sure it helps you a lot with your business, and, you're on TikTok, LinkedIn, all these platforms, which I'm sure are great for leads, but there's also, downside, big thing around like social media addiction. We've actually had a person that came on the podcast. He's a coach specifically for like enterprise companies and helping their staff manage their relationships with social media. So yeah, I wanted to ask you, and maybe me being vulnerable here, I've definitely my own struggles with like LinkedIn addiction because that's the main platform I've used. But yeah, how's like your relationship personally been with social media as you become more of like a thought leader in the space?
Yeah, I mean, talking about vulnerability, I think I used to have that with LinkedIn for sure. I think um, it's it's been interesting kind of coming to TikTok later on in my life of how different that's kind of been that experience. And the LinkedIn piece, I did used to constantly sort of think, oh God, look at all these people getting like all these likes on this post, and like, even before I started my own thing, I was still sort of looking at that going, God, that's overwhelming. And I think it kind of plays into this piece of unhealthy comparison. It's something that the book I'm writing at the moment has in it, is becoming more conscious of comparison around that going. And I've got a bit of theory around it, but I'll keep with the examples. So LinkedIn, and it was kind of like over the years, and I think it just became more comfortable with recognizing like what was important to me, spending more time building my self-esteem, more self-reflection of like my own journey and how I'm progressing versus anyone else. And then having come to TikTok, which I've been on for a couple of years and sort of dabbled in, and was like, and at the first I was like, oh, here we go again, the algorithm's against me, rah, 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 all this kind of thing. And then was like, actually, I'm just here to enjoy it. I'm here for me. I'm not here for anyone else. I'm the views, the other things will give me some form of feedback, but they aren't the thing that I need. Um, and it kind of just made me aware, like having gone over the last few years of just being more conscious of what you consume online. I've got a little activity I suggest people doing called the social cleanse, which sounds a bit more severe than it is, but it's kind of going through your social media, whether it is LinkedIn, Instagram, TikTok, whatever it might be, and going, is this person inspiring or intimidating me? And it can be harder now, I know, because the feeds can give you people you're not even following, but it's going, you can still have a choice whether you want to read that or not, whether that you start reading it and going, is that going to serve me, or is that going to sabotage me? Is that going to leave me in a better place or worse? Right now, you could go online and you could find all the reasons why what's going on in the world is terrifying, but you don't, because you're like, that isn't going to help me. So it's in the same way when you start reading a post, but it's kind of going through who you already follow and going, am I following this because it's helping me, or it's leaving me in a worse place? Because that kind of self-loathing can become a bit of a familiarity sometimes. Even if it is dysfunctional, it's familiar, it's comfortable, it feels safe. It's a bit like anxiety sometimes. It's why we put ourselves in situations, because even though it's not comfortable, it's familiar, it's a pattern that we're used to. So that's why even sometimes we can get anxious about not being anxious, because they're like, hang on, this feels too calm, like there must be something that's wrong in this situation. So I think being conscious of what you're consuming is really important. And also, I think one of the biggest reasons why comparison could become such a big thing is a lack of self-reflection, a lack of recognizing your own journey and progress you're making.
Yeah, I really like the term social cleanse because I've heard a lot of people doing what you said about customizing your feed, and as you said, is this person inspiring or intimidating? But the term social cleanse, I think I'll steal that one. That's a nice one.
Yeah, no worries. Yeah, I mean, it's going to be in my book, so plenty of people can steal it.
Nice. And what about with some of your clients? Because I'm seeing, say, for salespeople, LinkedIn is becoming a bigger and bigger thing. People are spending more and more time on LinkedIn. But yeah, a lot of them, and you mentioned that word, they're not using it consciously; they're using it more unconsciously and scrolling. So, like, what are you seeing with some of your clients in terms of their social media use?
Yeah, and do you know what? I'll mention, I don't know if you know Sean Hayes,
No.
head of business development at Aircall. Really great guy. I've known him for a few years now, and he mentions this in the book around the kind of link to it of just setting more of an intention of what you're going online for. It's not saying that you shouldn't go on social media throughout your day, you should never go on it, but set an intention. Like if you're going on LinkedIn, set the intention, I'm going on to research, I'm going on to learn, I'm going on just for a browse, but be more intentional with what you're doing, because then that also helps steer you towards the content that is going to serve you or isn't in situations. And that's one thing that I encourage people to do. I think the challenge nowadays is people are feeling like they have to post for the sake of posting, for example, or
Yeah.
personal brand. You have to have a personal brand, and it can be helpful, but the danger is, of course, you just post for the sake of it. And that's when people do get caught up in the outcome of it as well.
Yeah. And then there's because I think what you're talking about there is more around, yeah, people that are active on social media. That's more something like you or I would struggle with of, oh, I'm not feeling my best today, but so I still need to do my daily post because I hold
Mm.
myself accountable to that. Right. And that's one side of it. But then I think the other side of it is people that are maybe more, like lurkers. They go on LinkedIn to send a direct message or a voice note or research, whatever, but they end up just like mindlessly scrolling through the feed and don't actually take any action. So what
Yeah,
advice would you give to
so
that type of person? Because I think that's more common from my experience. So
yeah, well, probably. I mean, that's kind of what Sean was talking about. Is that kind of advice of even if you are what you call like a lurker, is going on with
yeah,
an intention still, and even if you don't have a personal brand and you've maybe never posted on LinkedIn, it's still going on with an intention around it, because the more things you can be intentional with, the more you'll recognize like you're in control of things as well, and the less likely you are to procrastinate or get distracted. So it would probably be the same advice really, is be more intentional with it, be
yeah,
and recognize like how it's benefiting you, and also like the benefit of just giving yourself blocks to sort of switch off from it as well. Delete apps from your phone at the weekend. It's a simple.
yeah,
Some people, oh, but I've got to re-download them. It takes 2 or 3 minutes. That's an
yeah,
excuse. It's like
yeah,
saying when I say, oh, don't have your phone in your bedroom, and I've stopped doing it for 4 or 5 years, and people are like, it's my alarm. It's just get an alarm clock. These little things that we have in the way sometimes that aren't really reasons. They're
yeah,
small blockers. But yeah, I think being able to do that, and as long as there's nothing wrong with looking around and finding other people's posts, but just sort of thinking, how am I building up my own internal validation, rather than going and looking at other people and maybe then comparing myself to them.
yeah. I like that internal because I've heard the term external validation a lot, but not internal validation. So I like that.
Yeah, well, I do a lot of work around attachment theory as well, and one of the big
Okay.
things I talk about there, particularly with anxious attachment, is the reliance on external validation, and the importance of, and I'll give you some questions. I've mentioned it a few times,
Mm,
self-reflection, but the problem with not recognizing and reflecting is you do become too reliant on other people's shout outs, praise, recognition, and it can
mm,
become like a bit of a drug where you're constantly needing it. When you get it, it feels nice in the moment, but it dissipates very quickly, and you're back to doubting yourself, going, did they just say that? Did they really mean it? Feeling like almost every day is like a
mm,
knockout game, and you're having to prove yourself it's a win or a loss. But the more you're kind of doing it internally, the less reliant you are on it externally. And when you do hear it, it cements it rather than just sort of feels like a shot in the arm. So questions, for example, how am I better off compared to this time last week, month, or year? Or what's one or two things I've learned from challenging or difficult situations from the last couple of months? What are two or three things that I appreciate about myself? What are one or two things that I've done for others recently that I appreciate from that? So those kind of questions, again, questions activate the rational brain, get you reflecting on these things. And people might say, oh, it
yeah.
doesn't feel natural. It's not natural. It's just not familiar. Like that's
Yeah.
the thing here, is what you're thinking right now feels natural because you've done it for so often. It's not a natural thing. You're not born to criticize yourself. You kind of just adopt it because of maybe how you were brought up, or that there isn't a way of which you've been taught to do it. So
Mm.
you kind of like work out other ways, which of course the brain's wired to keep us alive. So we'll gravitate towards the negative.
Yeah, this goes back to what you said earlier, which I think is some of the best advice on this podcast is like we don't ask ourselves questions, we're always asking other
Yeah.
people questions. And it's a good way to self-reflect. Yeah, because I definitely relate to that. A friend who's maybe known me from childhood, I may meet him for a drink and he'd be like, oh yeah, it's really great to see your business is successful and blah, blah, blah. And for me, I'm just thinking, oh, I need to do this. I haven't done this. I haven't done that. But they're able to reflect in a way that I'm not for myself. But yeah, why aren't we able to, as you said, do that internal validation? Think, oh, how am I doing compared to last year in my business, in my relationship
Mm.
with this, right? And we don't ask ourselves those questions enough.
No, I mean, I always say like kindness doesn't equal complacency. Being kind to yourself doesn't mean you're taking the foot off the gas, doesn't mean you don't still want to keep going, but it's a bit like climbing a mountain. Turning around and appreciating the view doesn't mean you're not going to keep climbing. It's just going, it's
Mm,
worth going on the hike to have a look around and go, well, look at the way I'm progressing, because doing that builds momentum and motivation to keep going as well.
yeah. There's one of your posts, I think it's maybe yesterday, you did it recently anyway. I found very interesting because I've had this struggle, and I know a lot of our trainers have had this struggle where we will work with a client and maybe we sold to someone in leadership, like chief revenue officer, head of sales, whoever it is, who kind of has identified their team needs help, right? But the problem is sometimes then when you start working with the client or the salespeople, those salespeople are not open to your help. And your post was around something around this is a way to get comfortable with feedback. One is just put yourself out there and ask for feedback, and two, make sure it's specific feedback. And I think in a lot of, especially we find like in one-on-one coachings, people are a lot more open because they're not worried about the judgment. Whereas I think sometimes if it's a group training with 5, 10 people, they're worried if they're putting themselves out there that they're going to be judged by like their peers, etc. So I found this interesting. I was wondering like, yeah, can you change someone's mind who's like maybe low in openness to getting feedback? Or do you think people just have that lack of will in those situations?
I think it's probably very similar to the vulnerability piece is kind of going first sometimes. You know, whenever I
Mm,
work with companies or individuals and I work with a variety of experiences, you'll get people in the room who will be, you know, I think I know it all. And, you know,
yeah,
obviously they've worked in the craft a lot longer than me. And it's kind of going, well, how do I utilize that? You know, how do I get their feedback? How do I get their thoughts on things rather than trying to make them seem like they don't know something? Is how do I bring out what they do know? From there. So even if like you've got managers listening to this with their team and you think, oh, this person, they just never listen to their advice, they're very close-minded, is kind of going, okay, how do I utilize that a bit more? How do I get them to open up and maybe share like their feedback with people so that then they may become more open to receiving it along the way from doing so versus just instantly thinking I need to tell them the things that they need to improve on. Is am I also shining a light on the things that they're doing well and utilizing that within the group to make them feel like I'm not just here to completely like debunk or like ruin what you've been doing for all these years and say it was wrong, because that's often why people are so
yeah.
resolute in their defense of what they do, is because they think, well, if you prove this was wrong or what I know is wrong, then everything else must be wrong, which is why on social media you see so many arguments going back and forth, is because people will stand fast with what they believe in.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a great point. Yeah, and it is often because I'm 35 and it will be, yeah, you're training a 50-year-old salesperson who's done it for years.
Mm.
And I thought, oh, I've been doing it longer than this guy, right? But yeah, it's that vulnerability in saying, look, I'm flawed, right? I'm going to teach you what I know. There's probably some things you know that I don't, and meet somewhere in the middle. Right.
Yeah. But I think overall on feedback, the biggest thing is become my point. The first one was, if you struggle with feedback, go looking for it. It's like cold calling.
Yes.
The more you try and resist it, the more difficult it's going to feel. But go searching for it because you feel in control. When you get feedback, the reason why it can feel so difficult is your ego can step in sometimes. And we all have an ego. It's there to protect
Yes.
our self-esteem. But if you're asking for it, you feel more in control of it because you've initiated it. So your brain isn't like, oh, we need to protect you. It's like, no, hang on. I've asked for this. This is what I want. And the more I get it, the more comfortable I will feel with it over time. And the more I'll be able to craft certain things rather than waiting to get it reactively when maybe something has gone wrong or in a quarterly review and going, oh, I wonder if I'd learned that 2 months ago, what could have been different?
Mm, yes. 100%. Um, So you had the, what was it called? The 90-second exercise that we did earlier?
Yes. Yeah. So just to build on that a bit more, the five senses,
Five
it's linked
senses.
to studies that have shown that in 90 seconds our bodies can reset themselves from a stressful state to a neutral one. So
Oh,
when we have this response, we have this kind of physiological dumpage of chemicals, a bit like a roller coaster, it goes through us, but we often react within those 90 seconds that causes it to
hmm.
kind of live on longer. So the idea of using something like the five senses is to almost like reset yourself. And you might still do or say the same thing afterwards, but you're doing it with more intention.
Yeah. So I think that's really nice takeaway from this call. Really nice exercise. We've been through, people can do that, throughout their day. What are some other, let's say someone's listening to this podcast, either it's the start of the day, maybe it's end of the day, and tomorrow they're going to be, feeling anxiety, fear, etc. All these things that we feel on a daily basis. What are some other like tactics people can take away from the show?
Yeah. So reframing the statements to questions of going, is this or if it's a question, is it a constructive question? How would I feel if someone else asked me this? Why did you do that? Would I like that? Would that help me? Probably not. What's a more constructive question to ask of going, what would I ask someone else? What would I ask a prospect? Or what would I want someone to ask me is a big one. If things are coming up, a couple of questions that can help, like thinking you're overthinking something. Where is the evidence that this thought is true or false? And what else could be true in this situation? They can be good ways to kind of look at the other possibilities, and rather than just jumping on the assumption of this person has done this because of this, or I did something wrong.
Yeah.
And then also that proactive and reactive of thinking, am I proactively recharging? How am I doing this throughout my day and week? Not just at work, but do I have it in my week? Do I have things that I'm doing with friends, with family, with my non-work identities, which is obviously another big reason why burnout can occur, is you neglect all these other identities.
Yeah.
And your number or your title becomes your self-worth. And that's everything that's important. And particularly when things are becoming difficult, that's when you start to sort of question things and maybe feel a state of permanence with, I'm always going to feel like this. I'm never going to get any better. So those would be some of my main ones. I mean, I've got plenty of others, but those would be my ones based on what we talked about.
Interesting. So you're saying actually it's healthy to have like identities that are separate to your work identity, because if you're too reliant on your work identity and something's going wrong with that, it's like your entire world falls apart in a way.
Yeah. And when I talk about that, it's not saying you should care less about work. It's going, you should just make sure you're caring as much about the other things in your life. And a good exercise for this is writing down, first of all, what are the 3 to 5 biggest identities outside of work that you play? So like a brother, a girlfriend, a boyfriend, auntie, volunteer, coach, runner. So like your other personal identities as well. And going, for each one, how do I bring value to that role? And secondly, what does success look like? Because in sales, it's very easy to gravitate towards this identity because it has a tangible number. We don't have that in our personal life. So it's becoming more conscious of, well, how do I bring value to these roles? What is success like? How do I know what's my KPI as a brother or as a friend or as a runner? And being more conscious of those just builds perspective as well, and it avoids you just neglecting these, which are often the things that are causing you to want to get into sales in the first place, and are also the things that help you manage all of that kind of stress. But they're the first things we sometimes neglect.
Yes. Yeah. Love that. Love that. That's another great exercise. Well, yeah, Chris, been a fascinating show. I just wanted to give you a chance to promote anything that you're working on that you think the audience could benefit from.
Yeah, I mean, I've mentioned it a couple of times. The book's going to be out in November, which is around all of these themes, supporting salespeople and leaders with their mindset and their mental well-being, not just from a health perspective, but a performance perspective. And I also have the Banish Your Sales Burnout course. So if you're listening to this and maybe you're experiencing or want to prevent burnout, talking about being proactive within sales, then that's also available. You can find that on my LinkedIn, and I believe in the show notes as well.
Awesome. Yeah, as Chris said, we'll put that in the show notes if anyone wants to have a look. Yeah, Chris, there's not many people doing what you're doing, specifically in the sales space. So really love the work you're doing. Yeah, thanks a lot for coming on today.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. Really enjoyed it.
Takeaway time. So the first thing is that 90-second exercise where we're feeling all of these different senses, using our 5 senses, that really helped me personally calm down. If you were doing it in the show, I hope it did for you as well. Try and do that. Not just today and we did it, try and do it tomorrow, try and do it the day after. If it was useful for you, practice it regularly. Now, the next thing is, I really like this part of writing down multiple identities. Now, this isn't some like schizophrenic, multiple personality disorder. We all have multiple personalities. We all have multiple roles that we're playing with our life. As he said, you can start with your family, whether you're a brother, son, husband, right, wife, sister, etc. So write those down. Then think even your hobbies, musician, athlete, gamer, whatever it is. And then with those, the next part of this, and this goes even to the work personality as well, is ask yourself questions, because we're always asking other people questions, but we're not asking ourselves questions. So ask, how am I doing compared to yesterday, right? How am I doing compared to 3 months ago? How am I doing compared to a year ago? For me, that's going to be my main takeaway, because I beat myself up a lot. I have a big inner critic. I'm that classic ambitious person who's an entrepreneur trying to achieve. But sometimes it's good to reflect and not always get compliments from people externally. Also compliment yourself sometimes and give yourself a pat on the back. So that's going to be my main takeaway. If you like this episode, we'd really appreciate if you can subscribe to us, leave a comment, leave a review on Spotify or Apple, as it really helps the reach of the show. And we'll see you later. Cheers.